Ancient Apocalypse Biases, Fallacies and Biases in Graham Hancock's documentary. In this video, I'll be covering 5 biases or logical fallacies that are present within Ancient Apocalypse, giving explanations and applications of Strawman, personal incredulity, framing, shifting the burden of proof, and confirmation bias. I will show these biases in Graham Hancock's documentary and point out how they are used to convince the audience. Shifting the burden of proof. Shifting burden of proof is where someone makes an extraordinary claim that deviates from the null hypothesis, and when you tell them that it isn't true, they force you to disprove the claim, instead of providing evidence for their own claim. The burden of proof is the obligation on a party in a dispute to provide sufficient warrant for their position. The null hypothesis is the main agreed on belief of a current time. Applications and example. Shifting the burden of proof occurs when either a proposition is assumed to be true because it has not yet been proven false, or proposition is assumed to be false because it has not yet been proven true. For example, person 1 says, "I always see counterfeiting in movies and fictional pieces, but never on the news. Counterfeiting must not exist." And person 2 responds, "That's ridiculous." But person 1 says, "Oh yeah? Prove it." In Ancient Apocalypse, Hancock says, "I'm not saying I'm right, but no one has proven me wrong that an advanced civilization existed before the Ice Age." This is an example of shifting the burden of proof, because Hancock suggests that his theory is true because apparently no one has provided evidence against it, whereas Hancock is the one with the burden since he needs to provide evidence for his claim. This is because his idea is an alternative hypothesis, which deviates from the null hypothesis, making it so that he must show why his idea is correct. The absence of disproof is not proof. Even though there is extensive evidence based on carbon dating, stratigraphy, and material analysis, Hancock still claims that they didn't prove him wrong. Hancock does this to make others provide evidence before him, which helps persuade readers to adopt his ideas until archaeologists can disprove it. Strawman. Strawman is where you misrepresent an interlocutor's argument to make it easier to attack. Strawman fallacy is the distortion of someone else's argument to make it easier to refute. Instead of addressing the actual argument of the opponent, one may present a similar but not equal argument. For example, one guy says, "Gambling probably doesn't give the best turnout, since casinos still need to earn money." Another guy says, "So you're saying nobody should ever gamble because it's impossible to win? That's ridiculous. People win all the time, and gambling is meant for entertainment, not guaranteed profit." Did you notice how person 2 twisted person 1's statement to make it easier to attack? This is an example of strawman fallacy. In Ancient Apocalypse, Hancock says, "Archaeologists think our ancestors were simple, primitive people with no knowledge or capability of building great monuments." This is a strawman because Hancock misrepresents what archaeologists actually believe. Archaeologists don't say early humans were simple, primitive people, but rather just have access to less technology. Ancient humans were still able to create complex structures. Hancock oversimplifies this idea and attempts to attack it by claiming that our ancestors couldn't possibly create such structures. By doing so, Hancock convinces audiences more to his beliefs. Personal incredulity. Personal incredulity is where a person is unable to believe something and concludes it must be untrue. Personal incredulity is where a person asserts that a proposition must be false because it contradicts one's personal expectations or belief, or is difficult to imagine. For example, person 1 says, "The earth is spherical," but person 2 responds with, "No way, the earth is flat." Person 1 says, there is plenty of evidence of the earth being spherical, such as how a ship will disappear over the horizon. Person 2 still responds, "There's absolutely no way the earth is round. That's just impossible." In this scenario, no matter what evidence is presented to person 2, he will constantly believe the earth is flat, just because it sounds impossible that the earth is round. This is relevant to Ancient Apocalypse, since Hancock says, "It's hard to believe that ordinary hunter-gatherers without any advanced knowledge could have built something as sophisticated as Göbekli Tepe. This is an example of personal incredulity, since Hancock literally can't imagine the prehistoric people creating such complex structures. Hancock oversimplifies the ancient people as ordinary hunter-gatherers to convince audience to adopt his views. He dismisses the idea of ancient people being able to create such large builds because he just finds it personally impossible, even though there is plenty of evidence, such as communities having organized labor, religion, and stoneworking abilities. Hancock positions his disbelief in order to convince audiences that ancient communities simply could not build such structures such as Göbekli Tepe, even though there is plenty of evidence, displaying why this is an example of the fallacy. Framing. Framing effect is a cognitive bias where people's decisions change depending on how options are presented, even though the options are usually logically identical. Person 1 says an ice cream is 80% fat-free, while person 2 says an ice cream contains 20% fat. If both were marketers, then person 1 would likely sell more ice creams, even though the statements of each person are objectively the same. This fallacy can be seen in Ancient Apocalypse through Hancock's, "Of course, this idea is upsetting to the so-called experts who insist that the only humans who existed during the Ice Age were simple hunter-gatherers. That automatically makes me enemy number 1 to archaeologists." This is an example of framing, as Hancock presents himself as enemy number 1 to archaeologists. Hancock says archaeologists are emotionally upset, even though they are just scientifically skeptical. Hancock frames it in a way to display himself as an open-minded hero, even though archaeologists are just ignoring his idea due to lack of evidence. This influences viewers to see him as someone fighting experts who are presented as suppressors of knowledge. The framing manipulates emotion rather than focusing on actual reasoning. Confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is where a person only uses evidence that supports their claim and ignores other evidence that disproves their claim. Confirmation bias is defined as the tendency to search for, interpret, or favor and recall information in a way that confirms one's pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses. For example, person 1 believes eating late at night causes weight gain. When reading online, they only click the articles that agree with them and ignore studies which show no link with their ideas. They become even more certain when their belief is correct. Application to Ancient Apocalypse. Hancock says, "Perhaps there's been a forgotten episode in human history, but perhaps the extremely defensive, arrogant, and patronizing attitude of mainstream academia is stopping us from considering that possibility." This is an example of confirmation bias, because Hancock ignores the modern archaeological evidence that disproves his ideas, but rather claims that the mainstream archaeological beliefs are arrogant, patronizing, and defensive. Hancock dismisses the skepticism of archaeologists as merely them being willing to accept the truth. Instead, he accepts information that supports his theory and rejects research that contradicts it. By dismissing mainstream academia, Hancock reinforces his own belief rather than questioning it. Overall, in Hancock's documentary, he tries to convince the audiences of his theory, using cognitive biases and logical fallacies such as Strawman to make his argument sound more likely. Techniques such as shifting the burden of proof, Strawman, framing, confirmation bias, and personal incredulity are all used to create the illusion that Hancock's concept is plausible, even though it goes against all modern archaeological evidence. These affect the audience's reaction, where they feel provoked, which Hancock utilizes to gain wealth and prestige by manipulating the opinion economy, by making his ideas sound game-changing or revolutionary. Thank you for watching my video. The bibliography is in the description down below, and please consider liking and subscribing.